in the criminal justice system and replace it with a system of risk assessments, so that instead of having people who really don't have the way to buy their way out of jail, this would make it possible for people to return to work and not have their lives disrupted by adjudication. Just a cool thing there. Anyway, that's just a filler. The most exciting thing for me personally, with this committee, has been that Damon and I are now co-chairs of the Criminal Justice Committee. And we have found a way to have regular meetings over lunch. I gotta say, if you want to have a good, strong committee, include lunch, and it really makes a nice difference because you have that extra incentive for getting together. And it's working out. It's working out. One of the products of our collaboration actually is the setup for tonight.
Yes.
And so I'm going to turn this over to Damon right away so he can introduce our guests and we can get on with this show.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out, and I want to thank Bart for allowing me to be a part of the Criminal Justice Committee and putting my little 2 cents and how we could inform the people of Greenberg, White Plains, and better Westchester what's actually going on in our criminal justice system. And I want to make a quick note. I want to recognize my brother Neil from New Rochelle Police Department, and hopefully at the end, we want to have him come up here because there's a test coming up for New Rochelle police officers, and I think it's very important to get our young people of color, men and women, on the police forces. It's definitely important. And if you want to go to blackwestchester.com, what, it was 2 weeks ago, AJ, we had Neil and we had Charles from Yonkers Police Department to talk about the importance of having young men and women of color and the need, especially in Yonkers and New Rochelle, and Greenberg, White Plains, all the 43 municipalities, to have more people of color. Because I got 28 years on the job, and I'm looking at the front door, and I would like to see more young people to actually come on the job. Historically, the Department of Corrections employed more black men than any other civil service department without Westchester County, but that was in the 90s. You know, those numbers have actually reversed. So we still have a lot of work to do. And also tonight, I believe at the county center, they're going to try to vote on overturning Astorino's veto on the immigration bill. That's very important.
That's happening right now.
Yeah, it's happening right now. That's very important because of the fact that they're not trying to make Westchester a sanctuary city. The only thing they're saying is that Westchester police officers will not assist ICE in rounding up undocumented. And what will happen is that if I am on a document and I see you get robbed, I'm not calling the police. I'm not going to call the police because they're going to come take me away. They ain't even going to care about you getting robbed. They're going to take me away. And that and what that does is actually makes the immigrant community more dangerous. It's backed by the Chiefs Association and different law enforcement organizations which oppose local law enforcement working with ICE. And whatever Astorino's talking is actually falsehood. To actually say that it's going to make the communities better. No, it's going to make them more dangerous. It's going to give that criminal element really free reign because nobody's going to call the police. So, at that note, so definitely stay on your local legislators to definitely overturn that veto, and if so, amend the legislation so the legislation will pass. Moving right along, we wanted to talk about tonight to discuss due process in the criminal courts. In the overall discussion of mass incarceration, one of the greatest things is our children are being arrested. And in the process, they have to go to court. And we have been seeing, which has not been reported, violations in that process. And I had asked Lauren Razor And I've asked my brother Peter Davis, which I've known him Woodlands High School, you know, which I know him way back at Woodlands High School, to come and talk about that. So I need to pass the mic over.
Yes.
Because we don't have another mic. But
That
no,
means
I can
another
speak.
mic dies.
It's all right. I can turn my voice up. I just want Lauren and Peter to introduce yourself and just give a brief background on who you are and what you do. And start with you, Lauren.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you stayed. I know it was a long meeting, so I really appreciate your being here. It's a very important topic about due process. I am a practicing lawyer. I have my own practice, and I just left an up-counsel position to a Wall Street firm. I was the corporation counsel of the city of Mount Vernon under the former Mayor Davis. Under the former Mayor Davis. Not laughing at Mayor Davis, but the situation in Mount Vernon is kind of interesting. I also was an assistant district attorney. I started my career under Robert Morgenthau, the Manhattan district attorney. I also was an assistant corporation counsel for the city of New York and rose as the senior trial counsel and the deputy for the city of New York. I also worked for the famous or infamous Elliot Spitzer. I was the chief of the Harlem Regional Office, which the jurisdiction was 96th Street North, and I handled all consumer fraud cases, and I brought consumer fraud cases on behalf of the people in that jurisdiction. One of the biggest cases we've had, which had over 200 victims or more, was an auto auction dealer in the Bronx called the Triborough Auto Auction Dealer, and we were able to put a stop to some of the unscrupulous practices. So I have been, in private practice, I have been called upon. I feel like my private practice is a calling. My most famous case is the one that just took place in White Plains. The reason why it was somewhat famous, whatever, it made the newspapers, but it was the most troubling case that I've ever seen in this century. I respect my brother here because he is on the front lines doing as much as he can to stop the mass incarceration. But I can tell you that there's serious issues, and I'm sure we're going to get into it and talk about it. But specifically, I have developed a blog talk station as a result of it, so I can give free legal advice through my blog because the community, as I see it after that trial, and although I know it, after that trial, I really, it continues to haunt me. And I handle civil rights cases, and I have a general practice, but I handle a lot of civil rights cases on federal court and state court. And that's pretty much my background. Thank you. Oh, pass the mic.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow. My name is Peter St. George Davis. I'm an attorney. I've been in practice now for going on 24 years. I started as an assistant district attorney here in Westchester County, originally hired under Carl Fergari, and he was on his way out. I was hired by Jeannie Impero, rehired as an assistant DA. After I left the DA's office, I worked with, I did a brief stint in legal aid as a staff attorney in Manhattan, and then I struck out on my own, and I've been out on my own in private practice for over, since the late 90s until the present. And I've been located in Mount Vernon ever since. I've done federal trials, I've done state trials.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Okay, I'll speak up.
You gotta really.
Yeah, you have to be a bit closer. I've done state trials, I've done federal trials, trials all over New York State. Everything that you can imagine, double homicides. I've represented serial killers, drug dealers, rapists. all kinds of cases that you could possibly do. A lot of times, and I'm going to talk a bit about the whole aspect of due process and what due process means. Due process, in a civil context, due process means to get a fair hearing. That means your ability to try to prevail with respect to a right that you have. The Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution says that no person can be denied liberty, property, or their life without due process of law, which in a civil context, you give somebody a hearing in the sense of, let's say, a driver's license. They get an administrative hearing at DMV where there are standards of proof that need to be met before somebody can lose their license or their license is taken. In a criminal context, due process means that you have a right to a trial. And here in the United States, you get a trial of a jury of your peers. Now, a jury of your peers is a relative term. And I see Damon laughing because, you know, if you go to, if you're in the Bronx, let's say, you get, primarily the individuals that come through in the Bronx as defendants are black and Hispanic. Primarily the juries are going to be comprised of black and Hispanic. Not that it is necessary to get a particular demographic in order to get a fair trial. I've done trials in Rockland County with all white juries. I've done trials in Westchester County with all white juries and prevailed. But when you talk here in Westchester County about the types of jurors that are brought in terms of them sending out the mailings and the kind of individuals who actually show up, it is primarily Caucasian. You get a smattering here and there of blacks and Hispanics. And during the course of what they call voir dire, which is jury selection, the prosecutor gets a certain number of challenges as well as the defense in order to strike potential jurors. And they're not technically supposed to use their challenges have to be race neutral in terms of the DA to strike jurors. But there have been cases, and the seminal case is a case called Batson, where jurors of African American descent were struck off by the prosecutor, specifically for race reasons. So the reasons that jurors have to be knocked off have to be race neutral. But the reality is, a lot of times DAs will create reasons to knock off jurors of color and predicate the reasons on so-called race neutral reasons. So you end up with juries that are mostly comprised of Caucasian individuals. And we know that many of the individuals who are coming through the system are, as indicated, black and Hispanic. I just finished a jury trial about a month ago on a Jamaican individual, and there was a young lady that said to the judge that she needed to speak to us in private. So I had already guessed that she wanted off the jury. So she comes in, the other jurors are excused from the room, and she says that the reason why she cannot serve on this jury is because that her house was burglarized years ago. The individual who burglarized her house was never caught. And the defendant, my client, was black, Jamaican. And because he was black, she could not serve on the jury. I started laughing, and I looked at my client, and he couldn't understand why I was laughing. So the prosecutor said that he had no questions for her, and I said, I have a few questions. I have a few questions for you. And then the first question was, well, you said that your house was burglarized. The individual that burglarized your house was never caught, but you can't serve in this jury because my client is black. Well, clearly it wasn't him because the individual was never caught, and you're basically just trying to get out of jury service. You didn't have to use a racist indication as to getting out of jury service. Just say the reason why you can't serve. But it's really, it gives the jury system a black eye when you have people who come out and say those kinds of things. And I don't really believe that the individual saying that was racist. She wanted off the jury, and she thought that this was the best way to get off the jury. So she ended up getting knocked off the jury, and we went forward. And fortunately, we picked a good jury. Case got tried, came back not guilty all counts. It was a gun and 10 pounds of marijuana. My client was Jamaican. I thought his goose was cooked. Because when I addressed it at the beginning, I said, how many people, if I tell you my client is Jamaican and you hear that there's over 10 pounds of marijuana recovered at his house, is there anybody that's going to be conjuring up images of Bob Marley smoking a spliff when they're looking at my client? You know, so it was a joint task force, FBI, Westchester County Police, Mount Vernon Police, that went in, raided my client's house. They found over 10 pounds of marijuana, a gun. 5 different officers testified, and my client never testified, and he was acquitted. And this was a primarily Caucasian jury. I had 2 black ladies and 1 Hispanic lady on the jury, and they listened to the things that were being said. They listened to my cross-examination, and they didn't believe what the officers had to say. And here's why. The reason was because I actually...
I'm going to interrupt you
Yes,
so I
sorry.
can say a few things.
Oh, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Okay.
But I do appreciate, because we're all in the same boat. The fact of the matter is we have trouble with our system. And I'm here tonight because I want to put out the word to the NAACP because of some of the things, and I know there are going to be some questions, so I'm going to be quick, and you guys, we can have like a back and forth. But the fact of the matter is we have issues in terms of a lack of representation, competent representation. We have issues where young black men are being pled out, which you've seen numerous times, and you've handled a lot of pleading out, and they're going to jail and doing a lot of time because they...
Can you explain when you say pleading out?
Pleading out means that I've had people and families that come to me, and sometimes they don't have the funds to hire a lawyer to actually challenge the system, because in Westchester, it's truly challenging the system from the judges on down. In the cases, and I'm sure my colleague here knows, we call it the third prosecutor. We had 2 prosecutors that were against us, and then we had the judge who we thought was also a prosecutor. So it's very difficult on White Plains in Westchester to get fairness. And I say that out of my 25 years of practicing law, that it's something that we need to bring to the group like this, and therefore we can challenge the system. Pleading out means that sometimes if you've committed the crime, that might be a good thing, to take a plea or a lesser offer of the time that you would get if you go to trial. But a lot of times these young men are innocent. And because of how the judges, and you know, I'm not anti-judge, I'm part of law enforcement, I've been a DA, we've been on all sides. But when you have the judges pressuring, if you take a plea to this, you get 6 years, and if you don't, you're facing 15. So we have a very flawed system, and therefore a lot of the young men are doing this turnstile situation, turnstile justice, and oftentimes lawyers have to choose between their clients, because a lawyer might say, this gentleman may have to plead out because the judge may favor me on this particular case. So, the judge is pressuring me on this one, but I have this one, maybe I can get a win on this one. So it's a lot of pressure on the lawyers. It really is to fight the system in White Plains. We find that there is a level of appeals that they lose. They have a high rate of losses when there's appeals. That's my understanding based on the research that I've seen, which means that people are going to jail, and if they cannot afford an appellate lawyer or an appeal, they may stay in jail. If they may stay in jail during their appeal, and therefore, if they win, then they get let out, but then they've been in jail. So there are we have problems, and I'm going to point to this courthouse up here in White Plains. I've practiced in Manhattan, not Staten Island. I don't know what it's like over there, but I have a sense. But I've never seen this before. So we have a lot to discuss, and hopefully you have some questions.
Yeah.
Sure. You get this?
No, I'm just gonna, I'm
We
just
can
gonna
hear-
talk, yeah. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the recent case of Selwyn Days. And a disclaimer, the man's been in jail for 16 years. I've seen him, I had him in my housing area. And Frankie, I think you know what I'm talking about. 16 years, five trials, and the last trial acquitted on all charges. That got to the press, but is that common for young men and women to fight on instances like that? Because he had everything stacked against him, but he continued to fight.
Well, the only thing, and of course the NAACP here has promoted throughout their history, the need for jury service. Some of us who work, we want to get out of jury service because we have to go to work. But that is the defense in the justice system. All we have is you. If we can't get it from the prosecution, we can't get it from the judges, we have to go to the jury. The jury that I last tried a murder trial, a 7-week trial. They said it was historic up in the courthouse. We were like sheroes. It was 2 black women, myself and my colleague from Manhattan. And we won the case, major victory. But we had to take a chance. The family was willing to roll the dice. My client was facing 25 to life. I come into cases because I have the belief of his innocence, so I'm not just there. If I see this, I'm going to fight for him. We fought hard, but what we thought gave us hope and confidence that the jury system worked. We had African Americans, we had from various islands, we had a